back to another episode of Tea, Tentacles, and Talk, cozy conversations about LGBTQ plus romance. I'm your host, Chloe Archer, and today my guest is the fabulous Maz Maddox. Hi, Maz.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show. I've been such a huge fan of like when you first kicked it off, like just the name of it. I was like, this is the vibe, man. I'm so into it. It's so cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I like to have a good time, and it's mostly like my excuse to kind of be social and get to know other authors as a newer author in the genre. I feel like it can be kind of hard sometimes
Oh
to
yeah.
get to know, and everybody lives different places, and so yeah. So this is sort of how I do that. But let me introduce Maz for those who are tuning in. So Maz's bio says writer, podcaster, and weirdo. Love it. Maz Maddox is the author of multiple gay romance series and has a passion for amazing stories. Her books contain laughter, love, heaps of adventure, and lovable characters. When she's not heads down crafting her next wild adventure, she joins her co host, Kurt Graves, to chat about their mutual love for queer fiction on the Hoof and Fang podcast. Welcome to the show. And some of you might know that I was on Hoof and Fang a while ago too. So make sure to go check out that fabulous podcast when you get a chance. So Maz, I always like to ask people a little bit about if they're an author, a little bit about their writing. How did you get into writing fiction?
So I think my story is very much on par with everybody else, like a big
Mm,
story lover throughout,
yeah.
their growing up and things like that. I actually didn't get into reading until I was a little bit later in life because I'm
Mhm.
dyslexic and I struggled with it really hard when I was a kid.
Sure.
And being 38, like books on tape and stuff at the
Mm,
time were hard to get to when I was a kid.
yes.
So it didn't I don't think I got really into reading until I was like like early 20s. I worked with a good friend of mine who I think she introduced me to Song of Ice and Fire and got me into like Game of Thrones.
Oh,
And then at that point, I mean, freaking collars off. I'm like I was absorbing everything because I had forgotten how much I enjoyed great stories and like on those off chance things that I did pick up a book like when I was a teenager, it would take me
right.
forever, but I would slowly chip away at a book. Um so fast forward a couple years, I started, devouring all kinds of different stuff. But when I
Mm,
was working at 911 specifically, I was working an overnight shift. Started reading some like straight romances, and they were fun. It was kind of whatever. But I picked up, I want to say Cut and Run from Abigail
mm,
Rue. I don't know how I found it. Somebody recommended it, and I was like,
right.
"Oh, this is the thing, right?" Like I loved it so much. So at that point, it just like I just devoured anything I could get my hands on within the genre. And then a couple
Mm,
years after that, I was like, all right, I got to try my hand at it. So
right? Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the George R. R. Martin. I've talked to a lot of people, and I feel like there are quite a number of writers in our genre for whom fantasy, epic fantasy was the gateway drug, so to speak, for
makes
like
sense.
reading addiction, and then kind of it snowballed from there. And I guess that, I don't know, for me, it sort of speaks to the fact that because I don't actually write contemporary, I tend to write like sci-fi, paranormal, eventually fantasy, romance in, the LGBTQ spectrum. And it's partly because I love the world building, right? Like bringing in
Yeah.
like fantastical elements that I definitely link back, I think, to my own love of the fantasy genre. Do you feel like your own writing is influenced by some of that kind of stuff that you like to read?
Yeah, I would say so 100% because I think what got me so into like Song of Ice and Fire and
Mhm.
the King Killer trilogy, like the Patrick Rothfuss stuff,
Oh yeah.
is yeah, right, like the amazing world building and the magic systems that are just complex and interesting. And
Mhm.
especially in like Song of Ice and Fire and things like that, like those worlds are so compact and so realistic. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
I feel like I could be dropped in the middle of Westeros and find my way to places. Like I'm so very intimately aware of all of the different places there. So I was like, I strive to be able to write like that one day. Like I want to do
Right.
a big sprawling, crazy adventure with
Right.
massive world building and things because it's so magical. Like you could just get lost in it.
Well, and I found too, as I got older, I kept gravitating toward a lot of the fantasies that had a romantic subplot.
Oh
Like, I
yeah.
love fantasy in general, but if there was like a romantic subplot, I was like hooked, right?
Hmm.
And so I definitely want to write like an epic fantasy at some point. But, I mean, the thing is like, the ones that I've seen so far that are kind of in our genre are a little different than conventional epic fantasy because like conventional epic fantasy like you're looking at like a 700 plus page book most of the time,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of the ones I've seen in so far are quite a bit shorter than that. So I'm like, and I already write like over 100,000 words for a regular novel. I'm like, okay, if I wrote epic fantasy, it would probably be that like at least 500 pages.
Yeah, it'd be one
I
of those
don't
like
know.
huge
Yeah, the
things.
big tome, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if readers in the genre that might turn some folks off. I don't know, but we'll see. It's gonna happen someday.
I
Oh,
I want that to happen though, because I think I mean
yeah,
it's one of those things. Romances are supposed to be short and sweet. Totally agree, right? Like if I'm
yeah,
picking up a romance, I expect it to be a certain word count. But I think, and or maybe I'm putting it out in the universe. I'm wishful thinking. I would hope that there's enough of a niche audience that would love like a sprawling high fantasy or just fantasy in general MM romance
right,
because I would read the shit out of that, right? So
right.
there's two of us
Well,
right here. There's got to be more.
and I mean, and look at the popularity of like the Untamed and some of these like Don May kind
Yeah.
of like. So I'm like, okay, it's like it's a matter of time. It's well, and also the time to write it, right?
Yeah,
Which
there's
like
some
that's kind of the challenge too, because I'm not a full-time writer, and so making the time, especially for something so long, because that would be like 5 books or more.
yeah.
Um, but it's a challenge I want to pursue. I want to see some more of that. I will say I'll give a recommendation to you and to viewers. The first like subplot fantasy series I ever read was Lynn Llewellyn's Night Runner series.
I read that.
Kind of old. Oh my God,
It's so good.
is so good. And like Alec and Sergel, I'm like, just like they're like one of my favorite like fantasy couples. Now, it for the romance lovers, it is closed door,
Oh
but
yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's very clear like they become a couple. Like it's
Oh yeah.
yeah, and like it's like multiple books long, and it's a super great fantasy series with a really like compelling romantic subplot as well
Mhm.
as like world building and stuff. And so I just love that series. So I always recommend it because it's a little older, and so a lot of people kind of now don't always know about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's when I
Yeah,
would.
I was looking at my bookshelf because I was like, oh, I wonder if I could grab it real quick. I found a beat up paperback at Half Price Books like years
Oh
ago. And that's
wow.
how I found it is
Oh,
I think
interesting.
I deep dived into like the Goodreads group on
Right.
yeah, on Goodreads, like that beta
Mm.
MM one. And so somebody was talking about it and I just happened to be at Half Price and I found it. And I was like, oh
Oh, that's
shit. So
cool.
I think I was able to find like the first and the third book or something. And then I had to go
Okay.
order the second one. But yeah, no, I fell down that rabbit hole hard.
Yes, yes. And she
So
did
good.
write like a kind of like more like explicit kind of like self-published, almost like fanfic side story type thing
Oh,
for
I
it.
didn't know about that.
Yes, yes, like a number of years ago. But yeah, I found the first book um in Books a Million like years ago after like
Nice.
around the time it had come out. And I was hooked. And that was where you're like waiting every year, like, is the next book gonna come out? Because trad publishing is so much
Oh yeah.
slower, and epic fantasy takes a long time to write. And but yeah, so anyway, I totally went off on a tangent there, but that's a great series for folks who like that. Um well, what can you tell us a little bit about like your writing process? Because I'm always really fascinated how different everyone's process kind of looks. So like how do things work for you kind of from when you get an idea to like, executing a novel?
So I think depending on the series, it starts with different things. Like I think with Wild Contracts, which is the thing I'm currently writing, it actually started. It's so abstract. So hold on. It's like
Okay.
I got one of those really really ridiculous merman or ornaments, the little
Oh, yeah,
fantasy ones.
yeah,
And he's got a cowboy hat and a blue tail, and his name was Dallas.
yeah.
And I was like, that is such a cute name, and I love him so much. I used to have him when I wasn't working remote. I had him on my cubicle, and people were
Oh,
like,
nice.
it was great. So I knew I wanted to do a character with that guy's vibe so much, right? So I held on to that idea forever and a day. Then, like, I saw Deadpool and fell in love with that type of just crazy anti-hero who kind of just bumbles his way through things. Like, he's very
Mhm.
clearly good at what he does, but he's so reckless and
Right.
cavalier with how he handles things that I was like, okay,
Yeah.
so if I write Dallas, he's going to be like this. I need him to be Deadpool-ish. And so I knew I had like urban, like I wanted to do something with vampires eventually, but I didn't have like a good idea. So eventually it kind of culminated with me hanging out with my alpha reader slash best friend Jess. We were pitching ideas and I was like, okay, we can make him like a vampire hunter and he falls in love with a vampire and that would be kind of cool. And I was like, but I'm gonna make him kind of a bastard. Like I kind of want him to be one of those guys that he has no business being alive as long as he has, considering how just reckless he is with his own life. So I'm gonna make the bodyguard tethered to him. So he's got to keep that guy
Oh,
alive. Otherwise, they
I
both
love
die.
it.
And I was like, that's hilarious. So that kind of ballooned from there, but I also wanted to like toss in Incubi because I'm a big fan of Jack Slane's series. So I was like, okay, if there's gonna be vampires, there has to be Incubi. So I tossed in Saya's too. So there's this like whole fucking subplot with him going on. So it ballooned. Like this entire series came from my dumb merman that I have, whose name was
Right.
Dallas, and I just had him parked in the back of my head for like 3 years. So it's just weird how the dots connect.
The stuff that lives in our heads sometimes.
Mhm.
I mean, it's well, and I don't know about you, but it I found it like increasingly challenging because I've got my number one Clifton strength is futuristic. So I've got so many series plans in my
Mhm.
head because I can't write standalone apparently. And that like they're all in there like when is our turn in the queue here? And I'm like, "Oh my God."
I
So that
totally
gets a
get it.
little challenging, yeah. But are you sort of like I know the spectrum is kind of like I don't like to make it a binary of like plotter and like pantser or discovery writer, but like I guess if we look at it as more of a spectrum, kind of where do you fit on that? Do you plan out a lot in detail before you write, or do you just kind of like wing it?
So I used to be full diehard pantser when I
Mm.
first started. So my first couple books took forever to edit because I would just go and then the plot would just spiral in weird directions. And so we'd get to a point where I kept writing myself into a corner. So I eventually compromised with like rough outlines. At
Okay.
this point, I think I'm pretty firm. Well, that's not fair. I would say I'm still a pantser because I think I come up with my best ideas when I'm just doing shit off the cuff. But there's
Yeah.
definitely like all the main story beats are plotted out. So I'm like, okay, I have my goalpost that like I wander through the snow to get to
Right.
kind of thing. Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
a lighthouse, but
yeah.
so I know the direction I'm going, but I give myself so much wiggle room between that because I
Mm.
think that's just I have the most fun when I kind of don't really know how they're gonna get there. I just know they
Yeah,
have to like get to the thing. But in
yeah,
between that, like I've come
right.
up with my favorite side characters and just weird,
Yeah.
goofy shit if I just
Oh,
allow
I
myself to,
know.
yeah.
I agree. I mean, and I tend to write like I lean a lot toward rom-com, and so I think like in part of it, like a lot of my comedy is almost improvisationally inspired, like
Yeah.
through that exploratory process that if I plan it out too much, it just sort of doesn't
Mhm.
gel together. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that's exclusive to kind of writing comedy more, but also like I need to be entertained when I'm doing this because it can be a slog to
Yeah.
write sometimes. And it's like, okay, I want to see how it went this way. I didn't think it was gonna go this direction. I mean, that's always kind of like exciting, but if I know too much ahead of time, I don't want to write it anymore. I'm like, oh, there's 20 more bright, shiny ideas over here that I haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, we 100% align, kindred spirit on that because I'm the
Love
same
it.
way. I get bored of my own story if I kind of know what's going on.
Yeah.
So then it's harder for me to actually sit down and to work
Oh,
on it. So
totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm
Yeah.
right there with you.
Oh, cool, cool. Well, you also mentioned having an alpha reader, and sometimes we have like folks who are aspiring writers on the show and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you and your alpha reader work? Because you talked about brainstorming with them. Because as a newer author myself, I discovered I get a lot out of conversational brainstorming with my alpha reader because we kind of share a brain a little bit. Like she's not a writer, but she's a major reader, and we were besties in grad school together years ago. And so whenever I'm stuck on something, I'll message her and be like, can you do a brainstorming session with me? And we'll talk. And like I can always get through stuff when I talk with her. And it's just, I mean, that's just something that I was like, oh, I wonder if this is just me or do other people do this. So what do you and your alpha reader do?
This is scary that you say we share a brain because me and Jess, our whole thing is one brain because it's the
Oh,
same. So
yeah.
if I usually it's text because we're weird and we never call each other. It's all just through Messenger. So we have a emoji set up to where if
Oh,
we say a certain thing, it'll flood the screen, like through
oh,
Facebook Messenger.
nice.
And one of the things that always happens is I word vomit at her because I'll get stuck. She'll pitch some stuff, we'll work it out, and we both go one brain, and the little brains float like up the thing. So scary how a lot you when you were like, oh, we share a
Wow.
brain. I was like, oh my God, you have a Jess. Like you have
Right.
the same thing I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
No, I'm really fascinated how many other writers have that. Because I think like, when you think about like Hollywood representations of like authors and stuff like that, I remember growing up with this idea of like the author being a really solitary kind of in like of course my frame of reference is always this says a lot about my personality, but it's always like James Caan's character in Misery, right? Or like,
Okay.
like starts the film, right? He's like in this like remote like cabin in the woods somewhere, and he's on his typewriter, and he
Yeah.
finishes writing his manuscript, and he has a glass of wine, and all this like that was kind of like my, I
Yeah.
think, childhood notion of how that works. But I found that actually having a sustainable kind of writing experience involves other people, like
Yeah.
having a good support network. Oh, hold on. What am I? Jasper says he's got to come say hi. Hi, buddy.
Hi, baby. Oh
This
my
is one of my
goodness.
dogs. Yes, he's a superstar, aren't you? Yes, he's like I've got to have my FaceTime.
Of
Yeah.
course. He's so cute. I love his mustache.
I know. He's a little Yorkshire Terrier. Yes.
So sweet.
Um, but uh so where was I going with this? Oh, but I think that oh, you're ready to go down. Okay.
He's like, oh, it's not
He's
about
like,
me
I've had
anymore.
my 5 seconds of fame and now I'm ready.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I think like at least for me, I'm sure there are maybe writers out there who can solo do everything without, any kind of input from anybody until they go to their editor. But
Hmm.
I really thrive off of like pitching ideas to people who have like a mindset that aligns
Yeah.
in ways with mine that are like, okay, I get your quirky creative brain and where it's going. And yeah, so if you're an aspiring writer who's watching, definitely think about if you've got that kind of friend who or support person who you could brainstorm ideas with, because it could be exactly what ignites you to go and write something, right?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I've been very fortunate that I have a great support network. I've got Jess, and then my spouse is also very, very supportive. He was actually the one who,
That's
when I was
cool.
standing in the kitchen, being like, I kind of want to like try my hand at doing self-publishing stuff. He was like, why not? I was like, I don't know, because I've never really written before. Like, I don't read a ton. I didn't at the time.
Mm,
And he was like, you should just do it. He was like, worst comes, push comes to shove, it doesn't work out, but just do it.
nice.
And I was like,
That's awesome.
okay. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, um, yeah, especially if you have a spouse or a partner, having that kind of support in your own home space is really important because I'm actually
Mhm.
kind of like shocked by the number of like authors in general I've seen in different groups and stuff whose spouses are not supportive
Right?
of
Isn't that heartbreaking? Like,
them.
it always kills me to see that when they're
And
like, "Oh, my husband really just doesn't get it," or, like, isn't supportive or whatever. Like,
well,
I don't understand that.
I think there's a disproportionately high percentage of that, unfortunately, in the romance genre, because I
Yep.
think there is still a like misogynistic stigma against the romance genre in general, because it is so heavily women dominated, and both in terms of readership and authorship, although obviously not exclusively, but it's one of those things where it tends to get denigrated a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, in patriarchal culture. Um, so yeah, no, that's really great that you've got that kind of support because when you don't, I think it's got to make it so much harder to sustain and keep doing what you're doing when you've got
Yeah.
negativity from folks around you. Um, well, let's talk a little bit. Let's segue into actually the book that we're here to discuss today. So this is Steal the Key. This is the second book in the Wild Contract series. Can you
Mhm.
kind of give us like a little mini overview of the series in general? Because this is I believe, a continuing book, right? So you
Yeah, yeah.
read the first one. So if you could kind of like give us a little bit about the series and then a little bit more particularly about this book.
Yeah. So the Wild Contract series is the one with Dallas, the one that was like inspired by the merman with cowboy hat and has nothing to do with merman or cowboys, but you know.
Bummer. No, but keep that
But
for another story idea someday.
yeah, well, like not to derail us too hard, but I've got a Stallion Ridge series that has cowboys and merman and stuff. So it's like it's in my wheelhouse. Just this one specifically doesn't have that.
Love it.
Yeah. But no, Wild Contracts is it's a trilogy. You have to read them in order, so it follows the same point of view character. It's only from Dallas's point of view, so it's a very
Okay.
unreliable narrator, kind of an idiot. Like my whole pitch for this was like an unhinged dumbass who is like kind of like does party drugs and is very laissez-faire about his own well-being and stuff, but he is a very well trained and talented vampire hunter and necromancer killer. So
Mm.
he hunts down necromancers, takes them out, kills vampires. Like that is what he does. But he
Right.
also freelances as an assassin to pay the bills, and he is a self-proclaimed fish trainer. Like he can train fish. Like that's on his business card. So he's stupid. But he so basically it kicks off with him hunting down a necromancer, killing this guy, and inherits his power. So he becomes a necromancer himself, and he's tethered to this vampire bodyguard, like a thrall, who is charged
Mm.
with keeping him safe. And of course, that is hilarious because he's like, I don't want you to be around, and I also don't want these necromancy powers. So he's got to figure out how to deal with that or get them to
Yeah.
go away. He's also, you know, very much head over heels for his favorite client who's hiring him for wet work, who's this like
Mm.
very distant, cold incubi guy who is totally cool with like calling him up for a good time, but he won't let their relationship kind of grow past that. So
Sure.
the first book is just nuts, and you get to meet his landlord, whose name is Barnaby, and he's also an incubus, but he's an asexual incubus. So
Oh,
he is actually really not into the sex thing, but he
yeah.
needs the sex energy in order to live because that's how they feed. So
Yeah.
Dallas pays him rent and then also gives him like enchanted sex crystals. So
Oh.
since Dallas is such a tomcat and he gets around, he will go like have a good time, charge those crystals for Barnaby, and then like pay him a nose. So it's just crazy. I have a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of really cool magic because each demon race has different magical attributes. Like
Mm.
humans have the natural ability to heal, but on the flip side of that, they can also do necromancy, so they can do like death magic.
Right.
Incubi have or they have a compulsion magic, so they can charm you and like get you to fall in love with them and feed off of your energy. There's also Jinn in the world that can compel you to like they can talk you into things and make you
Yeah.
think that that's kind of what you want. So
Mhm.
instead of them granting wishes, they kind of can make you feel
Manipulate.
a certain way or like kind of influence you.
Yeah.
Um, then there's Onis who have fear magic, so they can make you terrified. Even they'll just be standing there and then suddenly they're terrifying. And then there's imps who have no magic, and they're the ones who do a lot of like the charms and the witch work and stuff because they're
Mhm.
not naturally magically charged. They can manipulate things a little bit better. So it's a urban fantasy set in like a realistic, like Chicago-ish kind
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
city. So it's a lot of just hunting down things that go bump in the night and
Love
also trying
it.
to like navigate through all these new powers and these conflicting feelings with stuff. It's very, very slow burn. Like it is a true enemies to lovers,
Mhm.
unrequited love, or the his
Yeah.
love's not received. So the first book kind of is a lot of world building and kind of introducing you to everything what's going on with Dallas and how all this shit happens.
Mm.
And there's a little sexy times, but then into the second book, which is the one that's about to be released, it kind of picks up where that one leaves
Yeah.
off after like kind of everything is exploding and all this
Right.
shit's kind of happens at the very end of the book where like some really cool magical artifacts get
Mhm.
stolen by this big gang leader who Dallas pissed off because he slept with his boyfriend, and like it's kind of kicks off with him being like, oh crap, we got to find this stuff because if this guy like fences it off it's going to be bad.
Right.
So he has to go find those artifacts. He's still trying to figure out what's going on with his necromancy powers because they're
Yeah.
kind of uh a lot stronger than they should be for somebody who's never done necromancy before. So he's kind of
Right.
accidentally a savant and he's like, this is not good. Like I want this to be bad. Um so he's dealing with that. His vampire bodyguard starting to look attracted to him and he's not into that. His relationship with the incubus is weird and like keeps derailing, and so it's him trying to navigate that while he's got this looming threat of um the artifacts being sold off. And then he's the whole steal of the key is he's hired by this terrifying Gwyneth Paltrow style lifestyle influencer. Like she is dangerous and super into vitamins and wants him to find the death goddess's key because she wants to try to monetize death. Like she wants to be
Oh,
able to
wow.
repel death and do like, vitamins that actually reverse aging. So if she has that kind of compound, she can basically figure out how to control death and then brand it, right? So
Yeah.
he's like, sure, I'll
Wow.
take the job and I'm not going to give you the key. I'm going to destroy it because you're insane. So he's got to go take his stupid vampire that he's
Stuck with.
starting to get squishy feelings for and his crazy landlord who's this fussy, ridiculous incubi who is just like a book nerd and knows how to decipher languages and shit. He's got to drag them to like a cool crypt to try to find this death goddess key, and there's cool
Nice.
necromancy stuff. Like it's really fun. But Dallas, like you have to go into it knowing that Dallas is kind of a bastard. Like he's not a
Mm,
character that you're like, oh, he's so charming and like he deserves
right.
nice things. He's kind of a dick. And like that's
Right.
what makes it fun is that like he will come up with these great ideas and then fail miserably and it's great. So it's definitely funny. It's a little dark because it does have death and
Sure.
reanimated corpses and that kind of stuff, but it does have love, super slow burn. So the second book, don't expect a lot of like blossoming romances because shit's starting to
Right.
kind of go that direction. And then in the third book, everything comes together. I'm like,
The
I'm
climax
I'm
in multiple
yeah,
ways.
it'll stick the landing. It's what like
Love
I'm
it.
writing it right now. I'm about 50% through and
Oh,
like things are
nice.
starting to connect back into place. I'm like, okay, I'm doing the thing. So
Yay!
yeah.
That's always an exciting feeling when that happens. Well, this sounds great. So when does it come out exactly?
It comes out July 12th.
July 12th. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Well, I will include the pre-order link in the show notes. But why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of the process of writing this book? So you've told us about all kind of like the fun stuff. What was the hardest part of writing the second
I
book?
think the hardest part was, oh, let me think. I was trying to figure out how I was going to navigate Dallas having two love interests without it being like a love triangle, because I don't actually like love triangles, but it's one of those things where he's getting feelings for two different people, but they're not competing. Like Dallas is kind of competing against himself. So it was hard to kind of balance him being able to have very strong feelings for two people at once, even though like I'm pansexual, so I understand loving a lot of people at once.
Right.
I'm monogamous myself, but if I wasn't, poly would be something that I
Yeah.
probably would explore. So like it was hard to balance that without it feeling like a petty thing.
Mm,
And then also dealing with Dallas just kind of overcoming some deep tragedy in his life and learning to kind of get past that to be able to communicate kind of what he wants, and he's still kind of fighting that. So in like the third book, I'm hoping to grow him as a character enough to where he goes from being completely shut off, I don't want love, I don't care if I die, this is just I'm having a good time, to like, no, I do want this and I do need to step up and let people know that I care about them and I deserve to have a good life even though I'm not really a good person. Like the past decisions that I've made are not great, but I want to be a better person moving forward. So trying to balance that where it's like it's funny and slapstick and great, but also tackling these harder themes in a way to where it doesn't undercut what I'm trying to do with like too
yeah.
much funny stuff, if
Right.
that makes sense. Like I don't want it to be so goofy that you're not getting the message that like, oh, like people are allowed to
Right.
be flawed and to grow and progress as people and not
Right.
just, make fart jokes all the time. So
Right.
it was a hard balance, I think, of
Sure.
figuring out the relationship part of it
Yeah.
and trying to figure out how I'm going to have Dallas grow into somebody who the Dallas in book one and book three are like different people. Like that's what I really wanted to
Yeah.
achieve. And it's tricky, it's hard to do.
Oh,
I mean,
for sure.
you get
For
it. So,
sure. I mean, I think just actually writing a series where you are following the same either person or persons across like multiple books, it's
mhm.
challenging. I mean, I've always loved those kinds of stories because I like that long character growth. I like to
Yeah.
see, you know, the challenges and, so but it is if on the back end of it as a writer, it can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, but no, this is super exciting. And so the third book will probably be coming out later this year then?
Yeah, so, right now it's got a set date for Halloween. So
Oh,
as
nice.
long as I can, yeah, I was like, "Oh, that worked out great." Because
Perfect.
I think Halloween's, like, on a Thursday this year, so I was like, "Oh, it's
Awesome.
perfect
Yeah.
for a vampire book."
Yeah.
So if I can hit the deadlines I want to, I should be able to hit that, but it's just one of those things where the book keeps getting a little longer. So
Right.
I'm hoping I don't have to push it back. I'm just like I've been trying to be heads down as soon as I get back from work and just try to knock out word count every day, but it's tough. So we'll see.
Is, yes, having the full-time job and kind of doing the writing, which is his own full-time job. It's like two.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's difficult. But well, so I mean, I think that's good to know, especially because as I've discovered, there are a lot of folks out there who are kind of like, well, I don't want to start a continuing series until I know like when it's going to be done, or if
Yeah.
there's a firm date for. So anybody who's tuning into this and like interested in starting the series, you know that the last book will be out around Halloween. So
Mhm.
very exciting. So I also want to hear a little bit about your cover for the book because I'm super fascinated with the whole cover art process and like being an indie author and getting to choose our own covers and like the artists that we want to work with is I think one of the really fun things about being indie. I would really dislike letting a traditional publisher make all of those kinds of choices for me.
Yeah.
But that's just me. But like but I'm not an artist myself. I really wanted to be as a child. I wanted because like I'm very visual in my head, so I would
Mhm.
imagine like dragons and like all kinds, and I wanted to draw them. And no.
Yeah, same.
No.
I don't have it in me, man. I don't have the talent.
Oh, no. I was so let down as a child when that happened, because I was like, why can't I somehow translate what I'm seeing in my head onto the page? I couldn't do it. So
Mhm.
now I have to write it instead.
Yep.
But yeah, so tell us a little bit about your cover art, and did you work with a cover artist? Did you do your own? Like how what did that process look like for you?
So my cover artist for all my books is actually a dear friend of mine who I've known for we met when we were 13.
Mm.
So I've known her forever, and she was one of those people that I've watched her artistry grow since we were kids, and like she went to school for it and all that good stuff.
Oh,
So when
cool.
I kicked this off and started doing all of this, she started doing my covers for me. And I knew when I started, I didn't want to make my covers too traditionally romancy covers because while
Mhm.
my stuff is romance, obviously, it's so weird and quirky and like has a lot of action. Like the this main spine of it is romance, but there's so much other shit happening that I was like, okay, I
Yeah,
don't want to just do or I, have a normal romancy cover because I think that would be
right.
misleading. So we do all illustrated stuff. She hand paints all of the covers, which is just so cool. So for Wild Contracts, I wanted to do something a little darker and interesting, but without it being too scary. Like that's why in the on the first book, it's a skeleton hand holding Kevin, his fish. Um, but the second one, I was like, okay, I want it to have a skull because there's a character you meet that's like a cool skull and he's fantastic. So I wanted him to be on the cover. And she did a cool thing with the key and stuff. So I was like, it looks spooky and interesting and hopefully not too like too darkish because I'm worried people are gonna pick it up thinking it's like a dark romance. I'm like, it's really not. It's pretty funny. So that's why I was like, I have to make the blurb really good. So I'm glad you helped me with that because I was like, it's got to be fucking punchy and funny. Otherwise, people are gonna think it's this dark, gritty thing, and I'm like, it's super
Right?
not.
Yeah.
But
Although, I mean,
yeah,
I think
so
the cover will do well on Halloween, right?
yeah, that's what I'm hoping.
But yeah, well, speaking of blurbs, I mean, in your writing process, like, I guess, how do you approach blurb writing? Because I found that it is seemingly the bane of many an author's existence to write a blurb. And I, I am a really weird anomaly in that I actually love blurb writing. I find it really fun. But most of the people I talk to don't like it. So how do you kind of approach it, and how do you feel about blurb writing?
I'm with the majority. I don't like blurb writing because I think it's hard for me to try to do an elevator pitch because I mean, you just saw me just scream at you for 5 minutes about what my books are about. Like it's hard for me to reel it in and compact
Sure.
it in a good, snappy, marketable way.
Mhm.
So it's really hard and I tend to make them too long or
Yeah.
just I don't know. It's so frustrating for me, and I wanna learn to like them. I want this to be something that I look forward to, but every single time I try to sit down to write a blurb, I'm like, "I don't fucking know." There's so much happening in this book. I'm like, "What do I highlight? What's the important things? Like, what are
Mhm.
gonna be the things that people will look at and be like, 'Oh, that sounds interesting,' and not like, 'I don't care that they're going to a cemetery,'" that kind of stuff. So, it's just tricky for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously some people want to write more of a synopsis, which is like,
Mhm.
let me tell you all the like plot details and stuff. I mean, I kind of tend to approach it as, because I'm a character-based reader,
Mhm.
you hook me with a blurb that gives me a feel for the character. So
Yeah.
I'm looking for the voice of the character rather than everything that's going to happen in the plot. I'm looking more for like character voice and tropes.
Yeah.
So that tends to be how I approach actually writing it too. Um, and have had decent luck with that kind of approach. I'm sure not everyone kind of reads and selects that way, but like, you know, I don't tend to gravitate toward books because of the plot. Uh,
Mhm.
it's like there might be plot elements where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I gravitate when I'm like, oh, there's a character type. Like, okay, so this guy is like Deadpool meets like Harry Dresden or something, right?
Yeah. No,
And
I think
like
I'm with you on that. Like, it's
that,
the characters that really
yeah,
I get
right.
into it if it's a character that's really interesting. Like,
Right.
me and Alex started listening to crap, I forgot what it's called now. like Sinlin Rising or something. It's a steampunk adventure novel.
Oh.
And honestly, I had Alex not pitched it the way he did, I would have been like, no, I don't care. But he was like, it's a really fussy professor who goes on vacation with his new wife, and they go to the Tower of Babel, and they get lost like trying to get to it. And he was like, I was like, I don't know. And he was like, okay, picture this. He is a very prim and proper, fussy Englishman who thinks he is the smartest man in the room at all times, and he's very much not. And I was like, okay. And so we started listening to it, and it's hilarious. I love it because that character is such a fussy mess that I was like, I literally, he could be sitting there reading a phone book and just telling me how much he hates the phone book, and I would listen to the entire book. Like, the character's so good.
Yeah, I mean, I again, I don't want to universalize, but I think a lot of us read for character first and
Hmm.
foremost. Um, Maybe tropes are kind of neck and neck with that, but
Yeah.
like that's the Chloe Archer tip of the day for blurb writing is like
Yeah.
really think about your tropes, but also like bringing across your character voice because the minute you've like sold me on this character, like I want to know what
Yeah.
crazy stuff's going to happen to this person. I'm in, right? And so I think that that can work a lot. And I
Yeah.
think you've
Well, I
got
think I'll
like
try to like
yeah,
uh channel that next time I'm writing a blurb,
yeah.
or I'll just come to you crying and be like, help me, because that's what I did this time.
Well,
And then
try
you
on
did
your own
great. I
first,
was
and
like, this blurb's fantastic. Like, you knocked it out of the park. I was like, oh shit, she's really good at this.
then no, I like it. It's fun. I mean, part of it is because I really think about it more as if I'm a reader, right?
Hmm.
Like I don't know anything about this story. What would lure me in, right?
Yeah.
Um, and the character voice, and if there's something where I can get a feel like this is gonna be a real quirky world, like, I think we're on a similar wavelength in that we tend to write like on the quirkier side of things. And
Yeah,
so
for sure.
like I mean, I love those kinds of books, and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I want to communicate this in the blurb in a way that it's going to sell people who like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, anyway, but I could talk about blurb writing forever. I find it really fun, but um, so I want to make sure we have some time for some fun questions about you as well, because of course, readers always want to know a little bit more about the authors that they love. So we were talking about fantasy earlier. What fantasy realm would you choose to live in and why, if you could?
So I probably would go with are you do you watch anime at all? Do you know
Oh
Delicious in
my God,
Dungeon?
I'm a huge
Okay.
animator.
Okay, cool. Have you been watching Delicious in Dungeon?
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, I'd go there. That's what I would
That's
do.
awesome.
100%. Like, I wish I could give you a cooler thing, like, oh, I'd want to go to Hyrule or something. No, no, because I can die in
Love
that
it.
dungeon and be fine, and I get
Yeah.
to eat really cool stuff as long as I could find Sinji and just go hang out with him. But like, yeah, that would be where I would go. I would just
Oh my
eat
God.
dragons
I
and
love it.
adventure.
I love it. Oh my God. Yeah, no, I am a huge anime nerd. I
Love it.
also like read a lot of manga and light novels and stuff like that. I lived in Japan for a while. I taught English there way back in the day. Uh
Really?
yes, between my master's and my PhD, I lived in Tokyo. It was an amazing experience, and I'd already had a little bit of exposure to anime before that in
Mm.
college. I had a girl on my floor in my dormitory who had a VHS tape with like recorded off of Canadian television episodes of Ranma One Half.
Oh my God, love
I
it.
was like, I mean, this is how old I am, right? But like, I was like the one person in on my floor who had a TV with a built-in VHS player, right?
Mhm.
And so she came and hung out with me in my room one day and she's like, "Oh, let's watch this thing." And I'm like, "What is this?" And she's like, "Oh, it's this Japanese cartoon." And I'm like, what? And I was hooked immediately. And I was like, oh my God, the gender bending and all the quirky humor and stuff, I was sold. And then, yeah, I fell down the rabbit hole kind of after that, and Dragon Ball Z and all kinds of stuff
Oh,
that you
dude, I was about to say, I think we've got to be pretty close in age because when I was in Junior high, early high school. My
Yeah.
mom was a real estate agent and she had a Japanese client whose
Mm.
son would record Dragon Ball episodes on VHS and then mail it back to us because
Oh
I was
wow.
that kid, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
and Shin, the person who does my covers, she's in Japan currently. She's been there for
Oh
5 years.
wow.
She went there
Oh
for
wow.
teaching and now she does graphic design and stuff.
Oh,
So
that's
like
so
she's
cool.
fluent and all that good shit. It's really
Oh,
cool.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
like,
am not fluent. I didn't know any Japanese before going there. I learned a little bit of like conversational, like simple phrases and stuff, but
yeah, I don't
I,
know any.
unfortunate, like I can tell when somebody's speaking Japanese versus a different language,
Yeah.
right? But and I know certain terms and certain words, but like beyond that, some people are really gifted at acquiring other languages, and I think they have like some circuit that's turned on in their brain that just
Yep.
isn't turned on in mine. I've tried multiple languages. I studied French for years, Italian for a while, and it just little words and phrases, some small things would stick, but like I could not actually have a conversation with anyone ever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I tried and tried, and so I just decided, okay, I'm just gonna have to focus on the English language and
I
communicate
get it. I
that
get
way.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
I wish I could, because I would love to learn a lot of languages. Like I've gotten into like some of the Korean, the K dramas and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, it'd be cool to learn Korean as well. And actually at one point I tutored a Korean kid when I was in grad school, who had his parents were like on a temporary visa in the
Mhm.
US for the dad's job, and they were trying to like get their children's English up to speed, because actually in Korea they learn English quite a bit. Yeah, much more even than in Japan, but a lot of their conversational language they still need to work a lot on. So I tutored a kid, and so oh my god, and they always would make the most amazing like Korean like snacks and stuff when I would come over, like,
Ooh.
oh, like after school to tutor this kid, and like, oh, it's snack time, and I was like, oh, anyway, yeah, fun times. But yes, so I am a huge anime nerd and just like ran down a rabbit hole with that. We'll talk about that again some other time.
I was
Um,
about to say, I think we're gonna have to do another conversation because now I've
I
got follow-up
totally think
questions.
so. Oh, right? Oh my God, we must. We will. We'll
Yeah.
definitely do this. Um, okay, so do you have any strange writing habits or superstitions?
I don't know if I have superstitions, but I have gotten to the point now to where I think I've inadvertently done a Pavlov's dog thing with candles. Like I now
Ooh,
have to like light a candle when I'm
I've
starting to
heard
write.
about this. Yeah.
Yeah, it happened by accident because I just like Alex is super into scented candles and I was like, eh,
Yeah.
whatever, right? And then we share an office, so he would constantly have them burning. And so I started kind of fell down the rabbit hole. And so there's actually a company that does bookish candles, and she
Ooh.
did a relic line,
Oh, that's amazing.
and it's like almost gone.
Oh,
But yeah,
I
so like yeah,
love
so now
it.
I start like
So cool.
lighting candles and now I'm like now I enjoy the scents and so now I'm like, ooh, a new candle. So now that's my thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've heard it's kind of like, yeah, it's like that kind of mental trigger to like get you into the headspace
Yeah.
for what you're going to be doing, which I think is really cool. Um, yeah, I haven't had anybody yet with any superstitions, but so my one of my one of my strange, I don't know if it's like it is sort of a habit, but because I write mostly through dictation. So
Oh,
my
okay.
first draft is almost always dictation, and then I edit it essentially. And so my habit is when I do a sex scene, I tend to do like my 1-900 operator voice, right? Because I don't know, it just gets my brain
Yeah.
into like the headspace of
Holy shit. I love that. That's amazing.
the yeah. So again, I like to throw these things out there because, again, for anybody who's watching who's like aspiring writer, or you're new and you're looking for different strategies, like try a lot of different things,
Oh
because you
yeah.
might be surprised what works for you. Um, like there's no one way, and sometimes you could have a way nobody else has done before and it works for you. And
Mm-hmm.
so you got to find it, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's
Like
great.
um Well, Maz, I know we're getting close to the end of our time here today, and I want to be respectful of that. But I'm so glad we had a chance to do this. It's always a delight talking with you. But I always tend to ask my guests at the end to give us a little bit of a sneak peek, a preview, if you will, of what is ahead that they can expect from you for the rest of this year.
So other than the third Wild Contracts
Yes.
book that should be out on Halloween, I'm also going to be going back into the Relic universe with my dinosaur
Ooh,
shifters,
yes.
focusing on the like adversaries side, the origin
Oh,
guys. So like the
yeah.
Giganotosaurus and uh, I think I actually haven't been able to like deep dive on who is involved on Origin other than Ruben and Lance.
Mm,
So Ruben for sure is going to be the first one because everybody knows who he is. But there's
yeah.
actually a couple of his teammates that have to be introduced. So I'll get
Ooh,
back into my dinosaur bullshit
fun.
probably later this year. So I'm excited.
I love it. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's super fun. And what about your podcast? Anything you want to share with us about Hoof and Fang?
So we've got a cool Pride episode that comes out this coming up Friday. I don't know when this
Oh,
airs,
nice.
but yeah, so we've got something special going on with that and something that we're actually trying to do, other than the audiobooks that we do, the indie audiobook stuff.
Yeah.
We're trying to, if we hit a certain number of podcast or not podcast, Patreon subscribers, we're trying to start doing more serialized fiction, one of which being the Stallion Ridge series, my series. We want to turn into a radio show with like sound
Oh,
effects
how
and
fun.
music and stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, if we could get a certain amount of Patreon people, like we're gonna turn it into this serialized, ridiculous ass
Oh, that would be
thing. And
cool.
I want it to happen so bad. So that's something that's like, that's my big goal that I really want us to be able to achieve. But if we don't hit that, that's fine because we're still having so much fun doing the cool
Right.
serialized stuff and the audiobooks and getting to hang out with Kurt every week and make silly episodes with usually me not following the rules to the games he puts together. And yeah, it's a blast.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that's even something you could potentially do a small Kickstarter for too.
Maybe.
Like just
Like,
to kind of get like, and then like people could get early access, or I don't know how the tiers would work, but like could be another option too. But I
yeah.
love the idea of a radio play. Um I used to listen to some of those with my grandma when I was younger. But and then of course there's always like they always air the Orson Welles War of the Worlds, probably one of the most famous radio productions ever
Yeah.
done. And so yeah. But I feel like, it's a shame that that kind of went away as
Hmm.
sort of an art form, and I love to see it resurrected, especially in the age of like I think podcasts are here to stay. I think people really enjoy them, and so I'm intrigued about this whole proposition. But that's really exciting. Um, all right, well, thank you again, Maz, for being here. It was a real pleasure to talk with you. And folks, make sure to check out the Wild Contract series. Book 1 is already out, and book 2 is coming out July 12th.
That's right.
And it is Steal the Key. And I will have the link in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you all again next time.